This morning, the sermon is titled Money Talks. What does that expression mean? There's a story of an older woman who was walking down the sidewalk looking for a particular address, and she saw a young boy riding his bike out in the street. So she asked him, "Do you know where Johnny Locke lives, my little boy?" "He ain't home, but if you give me $1, I'll tell you right where he is," replied the lad. "All right," she said, dipping into her purse and pulling out $1. "Aren't you a nice little boy? Now where is he?" "Thanks," said the boy. "He's right here. I'm him." That's one way to think about money talking. But this morning, that's not the kind of money talks that I'm thinking about. Instead, we will wonder what money would say if money itself could talk. If your money could talk, what might it say about you? What would it share about its relationship with you or your relationship with it? Today we continue a sermon series based on the study by the Reimagine Group that's titled Living Generously. It's a series that focuses on the discipleship principles that are involved in stewardship, in living and giving like Jesus. Last week, we thought about the importance of giving God our first and our best. And I shared with you a story about a man named Frank who saw his son Evan give away his favorite toy to a little boy who didn't have any toys. Frank felt convicted by that act of sacrificial giving because he was about to give away a watch that was old, that meant nothing to him. It was a gift that would have cost him nothing. And that night, Frank had a dream. He found himself in a courtroom with his defense lawyer sitting beside him, and as the judge was calling forward the first witness, Frank leaned over and whispers to his lawyer, "What am I being charged with? Why am I here?" The lawyer responds, "The charges that are against you are very serious. You are being charged with loving money more than loving God." At that moment, the first witness takes the stand. It's Frank's money. And Mr. Money testifies that he has a great relationship with Frank. Frank cares for him very well. He gets lots of advice on how to spend him and on how to save him. But in the cross-examination, Mr. Money has to admit that he's never heard Frank ask God for advice about him. It looks bad, and Frank knows it. So he tells his lawyer, "Can't you call my giving to the stand? She'll testify for me." So in comes the short, petite witness, Miss Giving. Little Miss Giving shares that Frank does put her in the offering plate at church and occasionally sends her off after some disaster or other, and that he even uses her to support an orphan in a foreign country. But when Miss Giving is questioned on whether Frank's giving is sacrificial, she stutters and stumbles over her words. I'm just a percentage," she said, "and a small one at that. Maybe you need to hear from the rest, the 90%. I'm not qualified to make that judgment." And so the door opens and that next witness comes in, and a murmur rises from the crowd because that witness is so exposed. The witness takes the stand and spills every detail of Frank's spending. No more secrets, no way to hide. And a few moments later, the judge raises the gavel and declares, "I've heard enough. In the case of Frank loving his money more than God, I find the defendant," and at that moment, Frank wakes up. We're going to watch a video that reflects on that story.
Guilty is not a word we used to hear much these days. Guilty pleasures are in, guilt trips are out. Frank had a very convicting dream in which he was judged guilty. He was convicted not just by the judge, but by his own heart. He was giving God the leftovers, the time left over after he had done everything that really mattered to him. The money left over after he had paid for everything he wanted. There's this amazing image in James 5. Some people are hoarding their money rather than using it to help God's children. And God tells them, your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion testifies against you. They also aren't paying their employees fairly. And he tells them, the wages you fail to pay your workers are crying out against you. Stored money, spent money, both were testifying guilty. If your money could talk, what would it say?
Yes, what it wants.
Don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with money or budgets. It's okay to like money. But the Bible tells us you cannot serve both God and money. Everything in your life is either an idol or a tool. Is your money an idol or a tool to serve the Lord? Money talks. What would your money say about you? What would your time say? Your talents? Living generously is about living with a heart so full of love for God that it overflows to others with the best of all we have. Are you experiencing that life now? How do you believe?
If your money could talk, what would it testify about you? Talking about money can make us uncomfortable. In this culture, we value our privacy, and we find it impertinent to ask about someone's income or the balance of your bank accounts. We consider our tax returns private information. But we also recognize that how we spend our money, where someone invests their money, or where a person's money comes from, says a lot about that person. That's why for the past 50 years, candidates for public office are expected to disclose their tax returns because money talks. When David and I lived in India, there was a different sense about the privacy of money. I remember getting into conversations many times on a public bus or train, and in the course of that conversation, I would be asked what my salary was, how much my camera cost, and all sorts of other money-related questions. I don't know if the culture that Jesus was in had that kind of openness to talk about money, or if Jesus just had the courage to talk about things that were important no matter how uncomfortable they were. But Jesus talked about money a lot. Jack Alexander, who's part of that Reimagine Group, writes, Jesus speaks more often in the pages of the Bible about money than even love. I suspect that's not because it means so much to him, but because he knew it means so much to us. Chapter 6 of Matthew's Gospel that I read from is part of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. And in it, he speaks about money several times. He speaks about paying debts. He speaks about borrowing and lending, about giving to the needy, about storing up our treasures, and about not worrying where the funds will come from for our food and our clothes. And it's in the middle of that Jesus declares the truth that you heard earlier, that no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Jesus is talking about priorities and loyalties. Is your first priority finding ways to earn more money? How much time do you spend wishing you had more money, or worrying that your money will run out? How much time do you spend researching where to invest the money that you have? Are you more loyal to your possessions or to God? Where do you put your trust? What is the basis of your hope? Just as in Frank's dream, there are several aspects of our financial resources that can testify to the priorities that we have in our hearts. There is our spent money, what we spend on food, on phones, on shoes, on rent, on movies, on gas, all sorts of things that we spend our money on. There's our saved money, the money that we have stored away, saved for a rainy day or for some other purpose. And then there is our sent money, what we send away or give away to charities, to church, maybe to the kid who comes to the door selling candy for a worthy cause. A great way to take stock of our spent money is to look at our checkbooks and our credit card statements and see where our money is actually going. How much do you spend on the necessities of life, like housing and food and transport to a job, versus the amount that you spend on non-essential things? What things are you willing to go into debt for? Either with a loan or putting it on your credit card. And what does that say about your priorities? We can do that same exercise for our time because God gives each of us 24 hours in a day. That's 1,440 minutes. How do you spend that time? If you were to log it, how much of that time goes towards the necessities of sleeping and eating and bathing? How much time is spent in work or school? How much time is spent in watching TV and playing video games or Angry Birds or whatever the latest game is? How many of those 1,440 minutes do you use in prayer each day or in reading the Bible? Next, you can let your savings talk. Your savings may be in stocks or in savings accounts, or it may just be in an envelope stuck at the bottom of your cookie jar or your sock drawer. Jesus told the story of a man who had a savings. He had brought in such a bumper crop that he ran out of places to put it all. So he decided to build bigger barns and bigger silos to put it all in. And the man looked at it all and said to himself, "Self, you have done well. You've got it made and can now retire and take it easy and have a good life." But that night, God showed up and said to him, "Fool, tonight you die, and who will get what you have saved in your barn full of goods?" It doesn't really matter where our savings are, if our savings are in silos or in stocks or in socks. What matters is the role that they play in our hearts. Is it your savings that gives you the peace and the confidence so that you can rest easy at night rather than staying awake worrying? Or instead, is it Psalm 4:8 that speaks for you when it says, "In peace I will lie down and sleep, for you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety"? The third aspect of our resources that can talk is that sent money, the resources that we send away or give away. How generous a person are you? Have you taken the time to calculate your giving as a percentage of your income? Do you give of your time and your talents to serve God and to serve others and to be engaged in God's kingdom? What's the value of that in-kind giving that you do to church or to volunteer work? As you listen to your own giving, consider the percentage that God gives. Does God give a tenth, a tithe, a half? God gives 100%. God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son. And Jesus forgives 100% of our sins, not just a smaller percentage, but every single one. God gives us his all. Have you ever had a wake-up call when it comes to resources? Maybe a failed investment, or a foreclosure, or a job loss that awakened you to your reliance on money? Did it expose your trust in earthly things, your desire for material things rather than your trust and desire for God? These wake-up calls can hurt. We don't like to feel fearful or to feel guilty. But if we pay attention, they can hurt in a way that leads us to make changes and to reset our priorities. Throughout the Bible, God battled with idols that captured his people's attention and pulled their love away. Money is like that. Money receives the trust and devotion of its followers just like Old Testament idols did. In the stock market, one of the key words is confidence. It drives the market up and down. And what's another word for confidence? Trust. When an idol becomes our chief security, we forget the grace and love of God. We cannot serve two masters, and Jesus calls out his chief competitor. We are all guilty at one time or another of shifting our trust to this idol, and the evidence becomes clear. God just needs to look at our spending, at our savings, and at our giving to know the condition of our hearts. We may point to others who spend frivolously. We may compare our financial situation to someone else's, trying to justify ourselves and feel better. But the real way to feel better, to feel peace and a confidence, is to confess our failings to God, who knows it all anyway. We can tell God that we're trying to juggle the demands of two masters, trying to satisfy the demand of caring for our possessions at the same time as satisfying the desire to follow Christ. We can apologize to God for allowing material things to take priority over our relationship with Jesus and his purpose for us each day. We can ask Jesus to give us a fresh start, to fill our hearts with joyful generosity that holds tightly to God and loosely to things. We can't earn or spend our way into God's heart. We can't even give our way into God's goodness. Money is simply a tool to bring God's justice and care, to show our love for the needy, to show our love for others and our love for God. Paul ends that letter to Timothy saying, "Run for your life from all of this. Instead, pursue righteousness and godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness." This week, take some time to allow your money to talk. Take time to listen to what your money says, your time and your talents. Listen, speak to, and believe that Jesus Christ died to offer you a life of peace and purpose and hope that is based in this eternal relationship with your Father God, not in the things of this world that can be destroyed. And then commit yourselves once again to following Christ and to living in the image of our generous God. We're going to stand and sing together a hymn that we give thee but thine own.